Exercise 19 deals with the respiratory system. So the function of the respiratory system, most people are familiar with, is to provide oxygen. You need oxygen for a process called cellular respiration, for being able to carry out a lot of chemical reactions that are necessary for producing energy. It also removes the carbon dioxide, which is a waste product of cellular respiration. The one function that a lot of people don't think about is that the respiratory system is most directly involved with helping to maintain the acid-base balance, helping to maintain the proper pH in the blood. pH of the blood is very closely regulated. And so one way of monitoring and maintaining it at the proper level, there's two main ways. One is the respiratory system, the other one's going to involve the urinary system. The respiratory system can make changes very quickly to that pH. So when you look at the respiratory system in this diagram, you can see the various components of it, the various organs that are involved with it, such as the nasal cavity. Basically what's going to happen is, you know, you will inhale, the air is going to move through the nasal cavity. If you're breathing through your mouth, through the oral cavity, it's going to go down the pharynx to the trachea, to the lungs, where the exchange is going to occur. And then as you exhale, the waste products, the CO2, are going to move out of the lungs, trachea, pharynx, and then out the nasal cavity or oral cavity. When we look at the structures involved, starting with the nose, with the external nose, you've got your nasal bones and cartilage. In the nasal cavity, you've got the conchae that helps to increase surface area. The sinuses are going to help warm the air. They're going to add humidity. You may not think about it in very humid environments, but in very dry environments like in the desert, adding humidity to the air is going to be very important to help keep the lungs from drying out. The sinuses, because they are air chambers, also help to lighten the weight of the skull itself. Its nasal cavity is going to be producing mucus, which may be very frustrating and annoying at times, but it helps to trap debris. You want to prevent any foreign debris from getting down into the lungs themselves. So the mucus has to trap and keep that out of the lungs. And so in this diagram here, you can see this diagram of the nose. And as everyone is familiar, the tip of the nose, majority of what you think of calling your nose, is actually cartilage here. And so from the side view, the nasal bone right here, it's about right up in here. So all of this down below would be cartilage. When you look at the nasal cavity, when you inhale, the air is going to come in and swirl around, which we've talked about with the special senses for allowing you to pick up the scents and smells. So it increases that surface area, adding that moisture, etc. And then the air is going to then move down the pharynx. Excuse me. The pharynx is divided into three parts. The nasal pharynx, this is the area where the eustachian tubes are going to open up into, and the uvula can move up, preventing, uvula is that little thing, if you open your mouth, that little thing that hangs down in the back of your throat. You always wondered what that was. That's the uvula. When you swallow, it's going to move up, preventing food or fluid from your mouth from going up into the nasal cavity, or it's supposed to. So the nasal pharynx, only air is going to move down there. Now the oropharynx is the middle section of the pharynx, and both air and food will move down this. And then the laryngeal pharynx, this is also at the first part of it, where both food and air are going to move down until the very bottom of it. It then separates. Food goes down the esophagus, and the air is going to move from the pharynx into the larynx then. So you can see on this diagram, it's nicely color-coded, the three different parts of the pharynx. The larynx connects the pharynx to the trachea. It's going to regulate the air as it's flowing down towards the lungs and also leaving the lungs. The epiglottis, this is a piece of cartilage. It does cover the trachea when you swallow. So now that prevents food and fluid from going into the trachea and down into the lungs. Normally works fine. There are folds in the larynx. The vestibular folds are known as the false vocal cords, and then the true vocal cords, as the air moves through, it's going to cause vibration, and then that translates to sound, what you hear. And so, excuse me, the glottis is that opening area here. So as the air is moving down up here, you're looking down, and so up here, and it's going to move down. Air is going to move down into the trachea. So the trachea connects now the larynx to the lungs. It can expand to some degree, stretch a bit, depending on whether you're inhaling and exhaling. There are some cartilage rings that help to support it and also prevent it from collapsing. So you can see these tracheal, the rings through here. So as you can see from the larynx, now the air is going to come down the trachea. The carina is the area right here where it splits into the primary bronchi going to each of the lungs. So the bronchial tree is where you now have the branching that is occurring and going to each lung separately. This is the carina, that's where the trachea branches. The primary bronchi, so you go from the trachea to the primary bronchi. That's that first branch there. So you have a primary bronchi going to the right lung and one going to the left lung. And we call it a tree because you now have continued branching. It gets smaller and smaller in diameter. The air is going to flow from the primary bronchi. That's what enters into each of the lungs separately. And then from there it's going to branch. The lungs are divided into lobes, as we'll see in a moment. And you continue to have branching of the bronchi. So you go from the primary to the secondary to the tertiary and finally to the bronchioli. So each one, the diameter is getting smaller. You do have mucus produced here to also trap debris and trying to keep any foreign substances out of the lungs itself. So in this diagram, you do notice the branching and how it looks like the bigger branches to the smaller twigs of a tree, etc., until you finally reach down to the alveolar sacs, which is where the gas exchange is going to occur. And taking out the lung tissue, this just shows, once again, the branching pattern that occurs. Now, the respiratory zone, this is the area that is distinct from the conduction zone, which is moving the air from the outside environment to the lungs. Respiratory zone is going to be involved with the gas exchange itself directly. So this will be the respiratory bronchiole, the alveolar ducts, and the alveoli themselves. And so the alveoli sacs looks like a clump of grapes right here. And this is where the gas exchange occurs. You've inhaled, the gas goes inside these little sacs. Notice they are surrounded by all these capillaries that we've already talked about with the circulatory system, how it's coming from, the blood's coming from the heart. You are going to have the gas exchange occur here, return that blood back to the heart so it can then be sent throughout the body. So this is a site where that gas exchange is occurring. This is where all the good stuff's happening in terms of the respiratory system. The alveoli duct, this is connecting the respiratory bronchi to the alveoli. So it's kind of like the stem of the grapes. The sac is that cluster of the alveoli. It's the cluster of grapes. And the alveoli are the small individual grapes, if you will. So once again, this is where the gas exchange occurs. In the alveoli, there's different types of cells. There's the type 1, type 2. The type 1 cells are very permeable to the gas exchange to occur. The type 2, this secretes a surfactant. It keeps those sacs from collapsing, keeps them open. And then the alveoli macrophages, these are cells that are capable of carrying out phagocytosis. Because you're inhaling, who knows what's in that air? There could be foreign bacteria, viruses, and so you want to have a lot of phagocytic cells there that can immediately attack and destroy anything foreign to prevent it from being able to get into the blood and then go anywhere it wants in the body. So it's preventing infection from occurring in there. So this is just showing, once again, the drawing of the alveolar sacs, an enlarged view of just one sac, and then a view microscopically of what the alveoli looks like. Looks like a big open sponge, which is, if you look at lungs, that's what it looks like, so that they can expand greatly to have that gas exchange occur. Now, when you look at the lungs themselves, they are enclosed by the pleural. The left lung is slightly smaller volume-wise than the right lung. Why? Because it needs to have space for the heart. Because remember, the heart does point a little bit more towards the left side. So you need to have room for the heart there. The apex on the lung is the superior region. The base is inferior near the diaphragm that's right below it. Because the right lung is slightly larger, it has 3 lobes. The left lung has 2 lobes. And then each lobe can be divided or subdivided into smaller units. So here you can see the lungs with the lobes noted on it, as well as the bronchioli on there. So the pleural, this membrane, serous membrane, surrounds each lung, once again, because the lungs are moving. That movement, you want to try to reduce friction, and so the pleural, the serous membrane is providing that extra protection. There is fluid there within that membrane to kind of help lubricate, keep the lungs moist. The pleural cavity is the space between the pleural lungs. If you have pleurisy, that is an inflammation of that membrane. Pleurisy is going to be painful because even though it's inflamed, that membrane, you still obviously have to breathe. And so every time you inhale or exhale, it's going to be sore. And this is just showing the relation of the pleural sac, the lungs, and some of the intercostal muscles, which comes into play when we look at the physiology that occurs with the respiratory system.